Are you ready to be wowed by my amazing picture here? I posed for Rachel. All right, we are in Genesis 29 today. Genesis 29. Do you all know how your dad and mom met? Anyone care to share? Okay. Lived on farms adjacent to each other? So it was destiny right away, right? They were just... Yeah. Oh, that's great. How about your spouse? How did you and your spouse meet? Anyone want to share? School? There you go. Spent lots of time together there, right? Spent lots of time together there. Yeah. Katie and I met at Minnesota State in Mankato. For me, it was love at first sight. For her, it was, well, I had to wear her down a little bit. But we're together now. Anyone else want to share? Oh, yeah? Oh, really? Let's not record that part, okay? You weren't Mike, she won't hear it. Katie and I met at Mankato State. We were both in the music education. Well, I was in music education. She was music performance. We had one class together. Do you remember what it was? Introduction to Conducting, that's right. And she and I first sat, I don't know, different rows, different seats. And I just slowly moved closer to her until I was sitting right next to her, just each day. Not like in the same day, that would have been weird. But each day, a little bit closer, just nonchalant, whatever. Then I asked her out, and she said no. Then I asked her out again, she said no. And I say it's like 20, 30 times. She says it was only like 5 or 6, but she said no so many times. And I remember having a couple conversations with my my brothers and sisters about her, and it's okay, I'm sharing this, right? With one of my sisters, I was like, I know that, she and I would be great together. I don't know, why can't she just learn this herself? But then I remember having a conversation with my brother. I said, I think this is, I'm just going to try one more time. I'm going to ask her once. I'm just going to, get the no, kind of close the book on this and move on. So I went up to her, and I was just walking in, and I didn't even expect to see her. I saw her. She was talking to someone else. I'm like, perfect. I'll go ask her while she's talking to someone else. She'll say no because it's weird going up to someone while they're talking to someone else and asking them out. And then I'll just move on, right? So I go up to her. I ask her out. She says, yes. And that was such a surprise that I didn't even know what to do. So, and so I just made it up on the spot. I was like, how about Olive Garden at 7 o'clock on, I think it was like a Wednesday or something. And I was just hoping that I didn't work that day because I didn't even have my schedule in my brain. I just went blank. Thankfully, I didn't. And the rest is history, I guess. But yeah, so in Genesis 29, we're going to see how Jacob and Rachel met, and really how Jacob met both of his wives. But through the ups and downs, we're also going to see that God is faithful and gracious to provide. He'll provide not only for Jacob, but also for Laban and Leah as well. So let's look at Genesis 29. I'm going to read through the whole chapter starting in verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on that well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well, and see, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go, pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "Is it better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man? Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days, because of the love that he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, "Because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me." She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also." And she called his name Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. So men, if you were Jacob, how would you view your first day in this new place at the beginning of this chapter? Would you think God is with me because all the people that you needed to meet were there? Would you think that Rachel was a real knockout? Or wonder what Rachel thinks of you? Or wonder if Laban would let you marry Rachel? Wonder what would be going through your mind. Women, if you were Rachel, how would you have felt about Jacob's entrance into the scene? How would you have thought, like, how romantic? Or God must be with him? Or what a gentleman, the way he took care of the sheep for me? Or I wonder what Jacob thinks about me. Well, we see Jacob's arrival to the land of the people of the east, which means he's in the land of his ancestors. Remember that he had deceived his dad into getting the blessing intended for his brother Esau, and that Jacob is essentially running away from Esau's wrath. He was also instructed by his parents to go and marry one of his Uncle Laban's daughters rather than marry a Canaanite woman. And so his journey brings him here. Now, the first three verses, I should say, help us set up some context here. He comes upon a well, and what are some of the things that he notices? What's the first thing he noticed? Huh? Yep, a large stone. Well, even before that, 3 flocks of sheep, right? He saw the well of the field in verse 2, and then 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. How many, no, this is just for my own curiosity. How many sheep are in a flock of sheep? Too many. I was always trying to picture this, like 3 flocks of sheep. How many would that, be, just to help me kind of understand it? Anyways, what else does he see? He sees a large stone. And then we get a bit of insight. This stone must be rolled away so that the sheep can be watered, and then the stone would be put back in place. Now notice in verse 3 that the word shepherd is plural. It took multiple shepherds to roll away this stone. So this will be important in a second. So some shepherds must have been there, because what does Jacob do in verse 4? Talks to shepherds, right? I'm lobbing these right across the plate. He asked some people where they're from, and their answer is Haran. Now I bet he was thinking, how fortuitous. My relative is from there. And so he asks a specific question. Do they know Laban? And they do. How fortuitous again. And what does he ask next? Yeah, is he okay? How is he doing, right? I mean, this would be natural for us. In fact, I'm pretty sure people do this anyways. When I say, I lived in Pierre for a while, people will be like, hey, did you know this person? Pierre's like 14,000 some people. I usually don't know the person. But if I did, they'd be like, how's he doing? I know him, right? That's what he's doing here. Do you know Laban? Great. How's he doing? And they essentially give him 2 thumbs up and say, and there's his daughter Rachel. Now, would you describe this as lucky or as a coincidence? What would you describe this as? Would you describe it as coincidence, or would you describe it as God? Yeah. I mean, we would say naturally that it would be coincidence, right? He just happens to come upon the well. He just happens to come upon shepherds who know Laban. He just happens to be there when Rachel is coming to visit the well. But we should see that God is obviously guiding all these events here. He immediately grants Jacob success in all that he is endeavoring to do. He finds the right land, he finds the right people, he finds the right relatives, and the person he is going to fall in love with is literally on her way. Now, hopefully this sounds just a little bit familiar. What does this situation remind us of? It happened in the past of Genesis here. When Abraham sent his servant, what happened? Almost the exact same thing, right? Abraham sent his servant to go find a wife for Isaac. He too was able to find exactly what he was looking for right away in the exact way that he prayed to God for it to happen. So this is the same thing here. God is giving Jacob success in all that he is looking for. And now Jacob was first distracted with practicality. Sheep needed to be watered. But the men told him that they had to wait. And while they were waiting, here comes Rachel. And as soon as Jacob saw her, what does Jacob do? It's towards the middle of verse 10. Right before that. He rolled the stone away by himself, hence my picture. By himself. This took multiple shepherds to roll away. So Jacob was probably trying to kind of impress a girl here, right? And then in verse 11, he kisses her and starts crying. Ladies, weigh in here for a second for me. If you saw a guy show you this great feat of strength and then come up and kiss you and then start crying, what would you be thinking, right away? A weird guy, right? Now, I'm sure Rachel is surprised, right, to say the least. And Jacob's kiss was probably just a friendly greeting kiss, but those were usually reserved for family. Jacob knew that she was family. However, Rachel still had no clue to who he was. And I bet his crying was probably because of the emotional high that he was on. He encountered God in a dream earlier to Bethel. He committed his life to him. He shows up to the right place and at the right time to meet his future wife. I mean, do we expect him to be angry? Probably not, right? Not with everything going how it is. Or to notice everything that's happening and just give a deadpan, yay. No, there's great joy in this moment. He's excited, he's happy, he's nervous, he's seeing the goodness and the faithfulness of God, and he's probably feeling a whole lot of things, and so he just begins to weep. And then finally in verse 12, he fills her in on everything. He probably sees her expression of confusion or fear, or a mixture of both, and lets her know what's happening, and she immediately goes to get her dad, Laban, and lets him know. And so we see God's first revelation of provision and faithfulness to Jacob. God had promised him that he will be with him, that he will guide him, and we see him now providing for him and being faithful toward him. His mission is immediately successful. And so we see the first two lessons that we can learn here is that God will provide. He is our provider, and he is faithful. Have there been times in your life when God has worked immediately in a situation? That you have seen him provide or be faithful in that situation? In a plane? Yeah, what happened? Would you care to share what's happened? Oh, really? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Was everyone able to hear that? Jolene was in a plane that had lost all hydraulic fluid, and they were going to have to make a landing on foam. And the people around her in her committee were quite frightened, and so she offered. She said that they could pray about it, and so they prayed. She offered a quick prayer, and then they were able to land safely. Man, that'd be scary. God is faithful there. He provided safety. Yeah. All on an airplane. Then you're not scared to fly still. No. Well, because God is faithful, right? What do you think when God doesn't immediately work? Because I'm sure we've probably experienced that as well. That's true. It's not that he doesn't work. It's just not in our timing. Yep. I try to remind myself of, again, God's faithfulness. Like Jolene is saying, it doesn't mean that he's not working. It's just not the immediate results that we're looking for. We still trust in God. Look at verses 13 to 20 here. Next we see Laban going to Jacob. He gives him a hug. And again we see the proper cultural greeting of a friendly kiss, and they talk and hang out. Verse 15 shows Laban asking Jacob to name his wages. He says, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Apparently Jacob had been working for him the last month, but wasn't earning anything. And before we get to Jacob's reply, we're given some information we need to understand his answer and what will happen because of his answer. The first description is about age. Leah is older, Rachel is younger. The second description is about their looks. How is Leah described? She has weak eyes. Now, this is a cultural idiom that isn't talking about her being blind, but instead she has the absence of beauty. She is weak on the eyes. How is Rachel described? Beautiful. Yeah, contrasted to Leah, she is beautiful. And more importantly, she was the one that Jacob loved. And so Jacob answers, my wages can be marrying Rachel. And Laban initially agrees. And 7 years pass by in verse 20. And so here we see God providing Laban now with labor through Jacob. And then at the end of 7 years, coming into the next chunk of verses, Jacob asks to marry Rachel. Laban throws a feast, and Jacob marries Leah. Now, how could Jacob mistake Leah for Rachel on his wedding night? What might have contributed to their mistaken identity? They could have worn a veil, that's for sure. Any other thoughts? It was common in that culture to have a face covering on the bride until they were alone. It also could have been really dark. There may have been drinking involved. It was a feast. Leah might have been really good at impersonating Rachel. We don't know. But Jacob, the deceiver, was deceived. I like that one too. Jacob the deceiver was deceived. So Jacob found out from Laban that their cultural custom was that the older had to get married before the younger. So Laban proposed working for another 7 years for Rachel, which Jacob agreed to, and finally he was able to marry her. So what do you think was the real reason then that Laban tricked Jacob and gave him Leah instead of Rachel? Was it really inappropriate that the younger daughter married first? Did he actually want another 7 years of labor? Was he just trying to get both daughters married and thought that this was the best way? What's going on, do you think, in Laban's mind? All of them? Yeah, that could be true, right? All of them? Any other thoughts? Yeah, might have definitely cared for Leah. Yeah, so there's genuine care, right, for his daughter too. Yeah, I also attribute Laban's initial intentions as good. I think when he told Jacob to wait 7 years to marry Rachel, he probably thought that in that amount of time, Leah would get married. When she didn't, I could almost see him, a light bulb coming on in his head. And so he said, why don't I just have him marry Leah first, and then he can also marry Rachel. Of course, it's obvious from Laban's actions and just this interaction here that they didn't understand the detriments yet of polygamy. Do you blame Jacob for loving Rachel more than Leah? That's tough. I don't know that I do. I don't blame him for loving Rachel more because he had his heart set on Rachel. I do blame him, though, for the extent that he took his feelings toward Leah. Look at verse 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was what? Hated. Yeah. So not only did Jacob love Rachel more than Leah, Leah was hated. Sure, Jacob was tricked, but it wasn't Leah's fault, as far as we know. But then look at this dynamic too. What happens in verse 32? Yeah, Leah conceived, and she's going to bear Reuben. So Jacob hates her, but is still sleeping with her. That's just wrong. And yet this happens 4 times. Leah gives birth to Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And through it all, what does she desire? What is the one thing that Leah wants? It's obvious in the first 3 explanations of the names. She just wants love, right? She just wants Jacob's love. For Reuben, she thought, now my husband will love me. For Levi, she thought, now he has to be attached to me. What was it for Simeon? What was the explanation for Simeon? Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. So yeah, I feel compassion for Leah. But she also recognizes God too. She says that God looks on her affliction, that he heard her, that she will praise God. In fact, Judah, by the time she gets to Judah, she says, this time I'm praising God. So she is seeing God's hand in her life and seems to be turning to him and relying on her. See, God is providing for her as well. God is showing his faithfulness to her as well. It wasn't just to Jacob. It wasn't just to Laban. It was also to Leah. God is providing for her because he is faithful. Because unfortunately, she can't see the love with her husband. A couple of last things to point out. Back in verse 24, Laban gave Zilpah to his daughter Leah. And in verse 29, he gives Bilhah to his daughter Rachel. These 2 servants will come into play in the next chapter. I also find it interesting that Judah is the youngest of this first set of children that Leah bore. She's eventually going to bear one more. I think it's going to be named Issachar. 2 more. Issachar and Zebulun? Maybe. Anyways, but this first set of 4 is Judah. God has shown with Esau and Jacob, and we'll see this repeated throughout Israel's history, that God subverts what man says is important, which is the firstborn, and he often works through the younger ones instead. Judah is going to feature prominently, as we all know, in Israel's history, and he is the youngest of this first set of 4 from Jacob's first wife. He is the youngest of the woman that was looked down upon and mistreated. And I think that's an important thing to understand right at the outset of Israel's history. Any other questions, comments, or insights into this chapter? This one's a pretty straightforward chapter, even though it gives us a lot of interesting human dynamics. Have you ever sat down and, as you're reading through a narrative like this, tried to imagine what's happening? Just tried to picture all the different intricacies of what's going on? When I do, it kind of becomes a little bit of comedy for me, which is why you get pictures like that. But still, the things that are going on, this is real people's lives. They're reacting in real human ways, right? And God is working in and through it. And so I just encourage you, whenever you go through, we're not going to be back in Genesis again for a little bit, but when we do get back into it, make sure to just spend time trying to really see how a person actually reacts to the situation they're in. Especially next chapter, where you have 2 sisters now competing against each other. And that's a real human thing, right? We have sibling rivalry, usually. So, doing that helps the Bible come more alive. Jacob went to Haran to find a wife. I think he went there because his mom told him to. Does that make sense? He's really trying to escape the wrath of Esau. But his mom's also saying, and you need to go find a wife. And so he's kind of obeying, just like he did in the last chapter. All right, next week we're going to be talking about prayer evangelism, what that is, and how to do that. And so just come expecting, that seminar. And then right afterwards, we'll have cake and ice cream. So come for that too. Or come for that and stay for the prayer evangelism. All right, that's all for today. Have a good day. Good night.